March 10, 1988. Andy Gibb died at the age of 30. He was too young to become a full legend and too famous for his death to be reduced to a brief headline. His heart stopped after years of a body worn down by a life lived too fast, by quiet collapses, and by seasons of burning himself out just to keep pace with the lights. There was no final curtain call, no prepared goodbye, only sudden silence. A man once celebrated as America's Prince of Pop Disco vanished as if he hadn't finished living. Less than a decade earlier, Andy was the radiant dream of the late 1970s. Young, handsome, with a soft, emotionally rich voice, appearing everywhere. At 19, he achieved a rare record with 3 consecutive debut singles reaching number 1. But behind the smiling magazine face were opposing forces that crushed him bit by bit. A talent desperate for his own voice, yet trapped in the shadow of the Gibb name. A heart longing to be loved as a human, yet consumed as a product. A childhood inside the sound of fame. Andy was born in 1958 into a family where music was already the lifeblood. By the time he cried for the first time, the Bee Gees were no longer boys singing for fun. They were already on a professional path. Andy's earliest memories were not of classrooms or playgrounds, but of backstage corridors, recording studios, and cars leaving home before dawn. Music was everywhere. In the living room, in the car, in adult conversations about melodies and lyrics, and the next stage to conquer. When his brothers left home to perform, Andy stayed behind with a feeling that was both pride and dislocation, as if the world was moving forward while he stood watching. Material comfort arrived early, and with it, the isolation that comes from being different. School became a place of uneasy belonging. At an age when most children search for identity, Andy already knew his name carried a public weight. The first guitar, a gift that became a burden. The first guitar Andy held was not meant for performing, but for imitating the melodies he heard at home. Barry, his eldest brother, did not impose himself, but remained a steady presence. He handed Andy his first guitar, listened to his tentative tunes, and encouraged him to write songs and sing by instinct. To Andy, Barry was both a teacher and a model of an artist already embraced by the world. That closeness offered safety, but also created a quiet standard against which Andy would never stop measuring himself. As he entered adolescence, Andy spent more time in rehearsal rooms and on small stages than in classrooms. Standing in front of a crowd, even awkwardly, gave him a rare sensation. Being seen not as the Bee Gees' little brother, but as an individual. Yet beneath that excitement, his sense of self remained fragile, still unformed, while the world around him already placed expectations on him far beyond his years. Melody Fair. The first step into independence. Andy did not enter music as a child pre-placed under the spotlight. He began writing songs early and recorded demos before he could fully understand what a career meant. In 1974, he formed Melody Fair, an effort to carve out a space for himself. These early shows were small, unglamorous, sparsely attended, but they gave him a chance to stand alone on stage and face an audience's response directly. Music came to him then with the pure exhilaration of youth. He threw himself into rehearsals, demanded seriousness from the band, and insisted on avoiding alcohol and drugs, as if an instinct warned him he needed to protect something fragile. At the same time, his life lacked the harshness his brothers had once endured. Melody Fair was managed by his mother, and big decisions did not place him on the brink of collapse if things failed. When gigs thinned out, it was a slow step, not a fall. Australia. A different kind of journey. Australia was chosen as the next place for Andy to sharpen his craft, but the tone was different from his brother's story. The Bee Gees had arrived in Australia through deprivation and struggle. Andy arrived with family support, media attention, and the reassurance that there was always a way back. Studio sessions, TV appearances, and songs like Words and Music emerged in an in-between state. Not harsh enough to force survival, but not supportive enough to demand growth. His voice was acknowledged, his stage presence noticed. He didn't fail, but he didn't truly overcome anything monumental. It was in this middle ground that Andy's career began to show its defining trait. He moved forward without being pushed into a corner. But because he was never forced into crisis, he never had to ask what he would stand on if all support vanished. Barry. Protection that became pressure. Barry wasn't only present as an older brother or professional guide, he was a living measure of how far success could go when time was on your side. He shielded Andy from the industry's rough edges, opened studio doors, deflected public scrutiny, and stood ready to catch him whenever needed. Yet that protection carried a quiet pressure. Barry had gone too far ahead, leaving almost no room for visible mistakes. Andy wasn't burdened with having to be like the Bee Gees, but he felt he wasn't allowed to fail the way they had. Their early missteps were softened by time. Andy's deviations unfolded under the direct gaze of the public. When he walked into the studio in 1977, everything happened too fast, yet no one slowed it down. The song, I Just Want to Be Your Everything, came with few directions, just Barry's voice in the room. Andy sang by instinct, and the red light turned on as it always had. The burst of stardom. A dream that became a cage. A few months after its release, I Just Want to Be Your Everything climbed the charts and reached #1 in late July 1977 when Andy was still not yet 20. Success followed success. Love is Thicker Than Water, then Shadow Dancing. 3 consecutive debut singles at #1, an unprecedented record for a solo artist. Television filled with his image, teen magazines featured his face. The public saw a youthful, magnetic star always ready with a smile. Andy saw days with no space to slow down. In the studio, he worked hard and with discipline, completing recordings quickly according to proven formulas. Yet after sessions ended, he often stayed behind alone, listening back to his voice not to fix it, but to reassure himself that the sound still belonged to him. He was not merely a voice chosen at the right moment. He was a talent struggling to keep his identity. The disco backlash. The era turns against him. In 1978, the album Shadow Dancing became a disco-era dominant product. Bigger stages, brighter lights, louder cheers. Yet inside, the feeling was different. Everything was happening too perfectly, leaving no room for hesitation or error. At the height of his fame, disco began to crack. By 1979, a backlash emerged. Disco Demolition Night in Chicago wasn't just a spectacle. It signaled a shift in public taste. People were rejecting the very symbol Andy represented. He didn't disappear because audiences turned away from him personally. They turned away from an era. When the current changed, the hardest part wasn't singing worse, but finding a way to exist when the cultural tide moved away from what you stood for. He began waking up in unfamiliar rooms, needing seconds to remember which city he was in. Fame gave him no time to put down roots. The pressure of being perfect. By 1980, Andy was still a familiar name, still performing before large crowds. But his presence in his own life began to fall out of rhythm. The world still wanted him to be the same young, approachable prince of pop. The public affection narrowed his options. Every appearance demanded the same measured smile, the same controlled warmth. He performed the role so well that space for change kept shrinking. In the studio, he still sang with precision, but the feeling had changed. Songs no longer arrived with anticipation. They were released and drifted away. After Dark, 1980, contained well-liked tracks, but success no longer came automatically. Each release needed a harder push. Television appearances became more frequent. On Solid Gold, Andy remained visible and safe. But he was slowly becoming a familiar fixture rather than a leading artist. The show kept him in the public eye, but also softened the possibility of seeing him as an evolving musician. A body that could no longer keep up. The travel continued, city after city, with the same rhythm. The schedule didn't thin out, but the feeling of moving forward did. Performances remained well attended, but they no longer felt like events. Andy wasn't forgotten. He simply wasn't where change began. Vegas became a safe place to perform without chasing pop market swings. Each night repeated familiar melodies and familiar applause. But in the transitions, dressing room to car, hotel to stage, his body began responding in ways the schedule didn't account for. Sleep shortened. Mornings no longer brought recovery, only enough rest to keep moving. Sometimes he lay in his hotel room, listening to his heartbeat more clearly than the hallway noise. No pain, no panic, just a strange reminder that his body had limits he had never learned to respect. A quiet search for peace. Andy began relying on familiar routines and songs, not because he lost ability, but because experimentation required space he no longer had. He still appeared on time, still performed with poise, but between appearances, rest nearly vanished. On overnight flights, he wore headphones with no music playing, the cabin's hum the only sound. In those moments, the exhaustion wasn't physical. It was a nameless emptiness, as if his energy had been drained. He began seeking quieter activities, not to escape, but to find a life that didn't require an audience. He enrolled in flight lessons, where procedures were slow and exact. In the cockpit, there were no lights or stage, only instruments and the sky. For Andy, it was one of the few moments he felt present without performing. Family, a love that could not fix the pace. Private life began to come into clearer view. Andy married young to Kim Reeder, and family life offered a rare pocket of quiet. When his daughter Peta was born, he became more than a radio voice or TV face. He was a young father learning to be present. For a brief time, that brought safety. But family life also exposed what the fast pace had concealed. It demanded endurance, not a schedule. Andy's marriage ended quietly, without scandal or public drama, leaving a void work could fill but not resolve. It was not the cause of what followed, but a mirror showing what had always been missing: time to learn how to live slowly. Outro. A voice that remains, a life that warns. Andy Gibb's final years did not end in a dramatic collapse. There was no grand comeback or public farewell, only a slow fade into silence. He left the spotlight the way he had entered it, without warning. His hits continue to play on radio and playlists, a voice from a time when pop music was listened to with the heart. But behind those melodies lies a story that cannot be rewound, a talent that grew faster than the person himself. Andy Gibb remains a reminder of the cost of fame that arrives too early, when success comes before a young person has time to learn who they are outside the stage. Not every voice is given the chance to mature alongside the person behind it, and Andy remains one of the most heartbreaking examples of that misalignment, a life that burned too bright, too fast, and ended far too soon.